Many of the things that attract us to our phone are basically giving a low fidelity simulation of stuff that we need to thrive as humans.
The leaders that people trying to steal your mind are going, okay, this could be a problem.
You should not have unrestricted access to the internet until after puberty.
Let's go into work now. Your book, Deep Work.
If you're not getting to a deep work state, you are functioning at a fraction of your potential.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. This episode series is called The Doctor and the Nurse. Dr. Daniel Amen and I break down the highest performers in all different areas. He goes deep into the brain science. I interview on the actionable tools, and we put it together for the most incredible episodes to bring to you how you can perform at your highest level. Today, I'm talking with Cal Newport on the topic of distraction. So let's dive in.
Show of hands if you ever feel like you need to refocus during the day or recharge at night, and your mind is just running a marathon and you can't ever slow down. Everyone's hand should be up right now. Both of mine are. Meet Muse. Muse is a brain sensing headband that helps guide you into deeper meditation with real-time feedback. It translates your brain activity into the sounds of nature so you can, keep truly calm. Imagine meditation with a gentle guide to keep you on track. Now, whether you're new to mindfulness, that's okay, or a seasoned meditator, Muse can help you find your calm, build focus, and recharge. Pro athletes are using it, high-level business execs, anyone really who wants to take their game or life to the next level, and that's why you're listening here. So check out Muse. Visit choosemuse.com. Again, that's the word choose, the word muse together.com. Cal Newport, thank you for coming on to the Doctor and the Nurse podcast. I, just like we were talking about, give the analogy that you're kind of like Maui, Hawaii to me. Whenever I get to Maui, my blood pressure just lowers. I feel more calm and at peace. Whenever I listen to you or read your work, I feel more at peace. And I think that's a huge issue that the world has today is distractions. So I want to start off talking about how can we use distractions to our advantage as really, we live in two worlds, right? Our personal reality, which is the actual reality where you and I are living today. And then our phone is a reality of its own, which is crazy because a lot of people will take time away from real reality and are thinking about phone reality. What type of long-term effect do you think this digital distraction is having on the next generation or even our generation?
Well, I think a big part of the problem is that many of the things that attract us to our phone are basically giving a low fidelity simulation of stuff that we need to thrive as humans, right? So we need to be connected to other people. We're a very social being. Well, the phone can kind of give us a low fidelity simulation of that on social media, on WhatsApp. We're sending messages. We're in these sort of loosely connected communities. It sort of feels social, right? We need to be a leader. Like we have this drive as humans. Like I want to be someone my community trusts. Well, the phone can give us a low fidelity simulation of that, kind of trick us into thinking that on whatever social media platform that we're posting things that people really care. They kind of simulate attention. They make you feel like you are marshaling an online army, but in reality, they're just selling you that vision so that you look at your phone more often. And what happens is when we replace these things we actually need to thrive as humans with these low fidelity simulations, over time we become less human. We begin to become more alienated from our humanity. We think we're being social, but we're more lonely. We think we're being leaders, but we're actually not. We're being frustrated by it. We have our drive for relationships is being subverted, like romantic relationships is being subverted by other distractions on the phone. And we end up unhappy. We end up anxious. We end up bitter. We end up easily outraged. Our life itself becomes a low fidelity simulation of what a thriving human life could be.
Man, so let's say you're looking into your magic 8-ball. How does this reverse? Are we too far down this rabbit hole and this road where it's just the way life is going to be? Or is there, in your mind, a way to reverse this shift of constantly on all the time, digitally distracted?
Well, I think we have to separate, because I've written about both. We have to separate for
Right.
the sake of this discussion, always on distraction in work and always on distraction in our life outside of work, right? So our life
Yeah.
outside of work, I'm thinking about my phone. I'm thinking
Yep.
about social media, and that's what I want to focus on now. Work is a whole other issue. It's a big issue, but it's kind of boring, right? Email and Slack. Let's think about our life outside of work. I think there's two things that matter that we could really make a difference. One, we got to keep kids away from this until they've had enough life that it's not going to define for them what they think about life, right?
It's good.
I mean, I think John Haidt probably has this right. He's known this data for the longest time. I profiled him for the New Yorker years ago and have been following his work ever since. He's crunched all the numbers. He's looked at all the social psych research. He's talked to the experts. He's talked to the critics. He knows what's going on, and he says, look, you should not have unrestricted access to the internet until after puberty. Right? You need to let your mind develop. You need to let your sense of self develop. You need to get practice with what it means to be a social being and an adult before you give yourself unrestricted access. And that's probably age 16 or older. So that's the first thing we can do, is just give young people a chance to actually figure out themselves and how to live before they're subjected to this influence. The second thing we can do is get rid of the idea of the internet needing to be a small number of massive platform monopolies that everyone uses. We've come to think of this as being what the internet is. Like, there should be 6 services that we all use. But I've written about this. I wrote a New Yorker piece about this last summer. The idea that putting everyone on the same platform makes that platform better is completely flawed. In fact, it doesn't work. To have 600 million people using the same global conversation platform just makes that global conversation platform useless to most people. So I'm a big advocate for an internet that is way more fragmented, way more individualized, way more weird, like the way it used to be, where
Yeah.
I have my 7 sites and services and on chats and groups that I'm using on here that are completely different than anything you use. And I've found my tribe and the things I'm interested in. And because it's on a smaller scale, we are community curated. We set our own norms and cultures. I'm not exposed to the things I really don't want to be exposed to because I'm not on a global platform with viral spreading dynamics. I'm on like a small discussion board with other people who love Dungeons and Dragons or whatever is going on. I'm a huge fan of this sports team, and I'm like really getting into it with like other people who are really into the sports team, and that's fantastic. I think a more fragmented, individualized niche internet is a fantastic use of this technology. So we got to get rid of the idea that there has to be 5 platforms we all use.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Like, you can almost, I agree with you, create your own algorithm. It's not created and curated for you to tell you what you should believe or what you should think and what you should be interested in. But what you're saying is create your own algorithm of where you want to spend your time. That's really good, man. I love that. I love that. Hopefully, yeah, his Jonathan's book, The Anxious Generation, I think has been an eye opener for a lot of people. So let's go into work now. So we're talking about social media outside of work, and your book, Deep Work, just this deep state of productivity. I would kind of, compare it to the flow state, right? Like this elusive state of effortless effort. You're just in the zone. Now, it's easier for athletes to be able to put a finger on, hey, this is when I was feeling flow state. I can describe it, but not so easy for the man or woman who is in the office and working. And do you think there's a way to tap into this deep work in an actionable way for people to get more into the flow state, deep work, if they're not an athlete, if they're just a everyday person going to work?
Well, for almost every knowledge work job, it's critical. So not
Yeah.
only is there a way to get into a deep work state, but if you're not getting to a deep work state, you are functioning at a fraction of your potential for producing stuff of value and for therefore opening up more options for you in your own career. There's an interesting distinction, though, between a deep work state and a flow state. Uh, a flow state is a possible deep work state. There are other deep work states that don't necessarily feel like flow, but what deep work shares from other states is the absence of distraction. So it's the feeling of I'm working on this thing that's hard and it's the only thing I'm paying attention to. Now, sometimes this can put you into a flow state, right? Sometimes it doesn't. And I knew Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, but before he died, and I knew Anders Ericsson before he died, and they had this interesting back and forth on this. Like Anders Ericsson said, okay, here's a state that's not a flow state. You're trying to learn something hard. Now, this requires deep work. You have to give it your full undistracted attention. But when you're learning something new, it's the opposite of feeling timeless. It's actually, every minute that's passing because it's really, really hard, right? So like the athlete that's in a game will often fall into a flow state because they are executing these hard-won skills. They lose track of time. It's just they're lost in what they're doing. But that same athlete that's trying to master like a new form for a jump shot, they have to think incredibly closely about every part of their body in motion, and that's not quite right. And why is this not working? It's not a flow state. They're in a deliberate practice state. It's actually kind of painful, but they're both deep work states. So the thing that defines deep work is I'm not switching my attention between multiple different things. Most knowledge workers have forgotten what that feels like. They are so used to being in a state of continuously fragmented attention, email back, Slack back, phone back, that when they try deep work, so they go, I guess, spend 2 hours and my computer's not here, my phone's not here, it feels incredibly foreign. It's like you just gave them some sort of psychedelic or something because we've become so alienated from what it feels like to actually focus.
Wow. And it's crazy, right? Like you feel weird if you don't have your phone with you. Like, I mean, you probably do it. You just look around in a Starbucks or on a bus or a train, and nobody is just having conversations with each other anymore. It's just what is happening in this world. And you hit on this point of the frequent interruptions, the fragmentations. I think it was a UC Irvine study. You probably know better than I do. It says like 23 minutes. Then if you get distracted and you switch out of, task switching back and forth before you can get back into this, deep work or flow type of state. Do you think there is a way for people to actually successfully be able to multitask? Or is that just something we should say, hey, like, let's focus on this first, then this, instead of trying to bounce back and forth between multiple different things?
Our brain can't do it. It just can't do it. It's like saying, I want to run a 7-second 100-meter. You just can't do it. Like the human legs can't actually do it. The human brain can't actually multitask. The problem is the way the human brain works is that there's a lot of different regions of the brain that have to come together if you're going to be doing anything that's cognitively difficult. So you have to inhibit unrelated semantic networks. You have to excite networks that are related. This takes time. After 10, 15, 20 minutes, now maybe you're fully locked in on the thing you're working, meaning that your brain is the parts focused on what you're doing are activated, the other parts are not. If you glance at something else, you mess up this whole configuration. If I glance at my inbox, I see like highly salient, urgent obligations where other people need me to do things. And immediately our brain begins trying to activate those relevant regions and turn off other regions. And then when you turn your attention back to what you were working on, now you're scrambled. And it's going to take another 10 or 15 minutes to get that all unscrambled again. So if you're checking your inbox once every 6 minutes, which is the average in the sort of best data set I can find on this, you are nowhere near, you're never getting anywhere near being able to get full attention to something. You are constantly in this state of scrambling where your brain is switched between 3 or 4 different contexts. Now we get used to this and we think this is just what it feels like to be working. But when you try something different and you don't look at an inbox and you don't look at social media, you just focus for an hour or two at a time, it feels so different that it's almost like a superpower. In fact, like The Economist actually said this about deep work, is that working without distraction is like a superpower in the 21st century economy, not because you suddenly became much smarter, but everyone else around you is making themselves much dumber. So relatively speaking, you feel like you have the limitless pill from that Bradley Cooper movie. It just feels completely different.
Yeah, that's so true. And I tell people like, today, I think you have more an advantage to be successful if you're literally able to do deep work, put down your phone, even for athletes. All right, right. Like everybody's, I think something like checking your phone or touching your phone 2,147 times per day. It just takes all our energy, mental energy and physical energy. I'm glad you said that about multitasking. I feel like it's such a thing that it's hard to do, but when you do it, you feel great. You feel like you actually get something done that day instead of at the end of the day, you're like, what did I do? Checked email 47 times. I think it also leads into the overload effect. And when I talk to companies and CEOs, that's one of the main issues that they have. They're just overwhelmed and overloaded. So I want to go into a couple different studies that we'll talk about. There was one conducted in the 90s, the information fatigue syndrome, which refers to the stress and the cognitive strain caused by overwhelming amount of information, basically alluding to too much information in your brain will actually make you become dumber, when most people would think the contrary, right? Like the more information, the smarter you're going to get. Do you think this is true? Do you think, humans are becoming dumber because we have more information, we're filling it into our brains and probably not, creating the myelin that's needed to actually become smarter?
Yeah, we overwhelm our brain with new information. For us to actually integrate information into a useful way in our brain takes time and attention. It's a complicated process where you are updating your internal mental schemas and structures for how the relevant part of the world works. This requires time. You have to sit with the information. You have to rehearse the information in your own mind. You have to spend time with yourself trying to play with it and work with it. We can't do that if it's 150 emails a day, all with different types of information. We can't do that when we're using algorithmically boosted information streams to distract ourselves on our phones. It's too much information coming in. It's not being integrated. So you fry the circuits, and it puts us in that state of anxiety. It puts us in that state of disconnection from ourselves and from the world. So information overload it's a problem, right? We weren't meant to be just surrounded by data at all times. We're not a database. We're not a computer processor. We're humans, and our brains are designed to do very specific things. This is one of the big problems I come back to with a lot of technical issues today is mismatches between the way humans operate and the expectations of the technologies that we're using. Those mismatches are at the core of so many of the sort of insecurities or discomforts that we currently feel towards current tools.
Yeah, talk to me about the overload of information from the internet, the Google effect. I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what you're saying. There's the study also done, which is known as the Google effect in terms of digital amnesia, where we just have this at our whim. Do you think Google is doing us a disservice where everything becomes so easy to look up, where we don't even really have to do actual research or thinking or, I guess, you know, creating or studying, learning, creating our own knowledge that actually sticks, but it's more of a just a quick hit?
Well, I think definitely Google plus social media. The problem is the information is so available and we can find any information we want that we don't go through the slow process of building up our own understanding of the world. So building up a mental schema based on information and experience that we then use to understand what we see. This is how humans used to confront complicated issues. In a environment of information overload, instead, we just sort of glom on to information that gives us good vibes. Like, I don't know, this kind of feels right. I don't like those people, and these people are on the other side of them. And it's instead of having a consistent understanding of the world, you're surfing online vibes. I'm with them. I'm with them. Let me say this. Let me throw this out here. I'm on this team. No, I'm on this team. You're regurgitating lines that you have no idea like where this is actually coming from or what's actually underneath it. And of course, this is terrible for discourse. It's terrible for civic calmness, but it's terrible for yourself because you don't have a working definition of the world. You're just sort of being bounced around by online forces, which is like not a great place to be psychologically.
Yeah, I just feel like it's gonna wear everybody out to some extent. Like it's the pendulum's gonna swing so far that people can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, just even driving over here to the studio in Hollywood, I'm just bombarded by 8 zillion different things, and I'm stressed coming driving over here. And then there's a whole digital world that stresses you out even more. I want it all to be like slow productivity. Like even just reading that last book, I felt so at ease. The Maui effect that I was telling you about. So the listeners of this podcast love tools. We love actions. How can we implement this type of slow productivity into our lives and get away from the hurriedness that society is trying to put upon us? What are some of your favorite tools, Cal?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, one of it's just a habit. Like when you're home, don't have your phone be something that's with you by default. Instead, when you get home, you plug your phone in the same place. It's in the kitchen, it's in the foyer, right? If you need to look something up, you go to where your phone is. If you need to check in on a text conversation, you go to where your phone is. If you need to take a call, you put the ringer on, just like the old landlines, and you go to where your phone is. You're not cutting yourself off from having access to all of these things on your phone, but you're eliminating the phone as being with you. So it's no longer a default source of distraction, right? So now when you're watching TV, it's not there for you to pull out at like the slightest hint of boredom. When you're at dinner, it's not there for you to pull out at the slightest hint of boredom. When you're trying to read something, it's not there for you to pull out at the slightest hint of boredom. It doesn't eliminate the phone from your life, but it does make you comfortable with the idea of not having the phone with you. It gives your brain a reminder of what a non-cybernetic phone connected existence actually feels like. And the more you feel that, the more you say, this is kind of nice. And the more your relationship with your phone is going to fragment. The other thing I recommend to a lot of people is use less social media. Take it off your phone if you can. And for the social media you use technology to make it less sticky, right? Like if you use Facebook because you have a running club that uses Facebook groups, use the newsfeed eradicator plugin so that when you log into Facebook, all you see is what's going on from that group. If you use YouTube because there's like some shows like yours that people you like to watch, get one of these plugins for your browser that wipes the recommendations off the side and just bookmark the shows you like as if it's like a channel you would turn to when you turn on your TV. You'll learn when they update and just go straight to those pages and watch the shows. So you can use technology to actually make these addictive technologies much less addictive.
Man, those are two great tools. I've been using the black and white scale on my phone, and I found it actually makes me less want to click on Instagram or any other of the apps that I have, just because it's not as aesthetically pleasing in the black and white scale. Maybe there's something to that. I'm not quite sure. I'm just trying to figure out ways as well. Cal, you're amazing. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. I love your work. Obviously, I know the world, people would be in a much better place if they all read it, if they all listened to what you do. Can you just give the audience, quick, how do we find you, what your show, and just so we can get more Cal Newport?
Well, you're not going to find me on social media because I've never had an account, but
I know I couldn't find you. You're right.
yeah, it's not for me, but I do have a podcast,
Right.
Deep Questions with Cal Newport. You can find that anywhere. And we put video version of that podcast on YouTube. Just make sure you ignore the recommendations when you go to watch it.
Cal, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for your time, man.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And now let's check in with Dr. Daniel Amen and figure out what's going on in Cal's brain when he's teaching us about distraction. Hey, so Cal Newport said that a deep work state only occurs if there's absence of distraction. And it's interesting to think about an absence of distraction in, this day and age. Do you think this world, with the amount of distractions, technology, do you think there is going to be just more and more distractions that we're inundated with as technology continues? Or do you think we can actually reverse this type of distraction age that we live in?
Well, I think actually many people in Silicon Valley talk about dopamine detoxes. And so the leaders in the space of people trying to steal your mind are going, okay, this could be a problem. Yeah. And so I think there is hope if we learn the lessons. Australia just limited social media for people under 16. And I like that.
Yeah.
That's really good that they're not allowing these tech companies to just steal the minds of kids. So people are seeing it as a problem, and that's the first step in solving a problem.
Yeah. Do you think the Australian limiting that to under 16, do you think that's something that can catch on in the United States? Is it just policy that has to do that?
I think so. Yeah. As we see the studies that social media has some serious potential harm, that people are acting on it. I mean, for example, the state of California doesn't allow public schools to start early anymore.
Yeah.
Because the research is teenagers who sleep on average just an hour less than their peers have a higher incidence of depression and suicide.
Good point.
And so when the science becomes available, smart people act on it.
So Cal also talked about the unspoken problem in the world is when we replace things we need to thrive as humans with low fidelity simulations, being our phones, over time we essentially become less human. So I think it's an important question as we, as a society need to come together, figure out how do we win the battle against the phones? Not just social media, but how do we, have more playtime or more time outside? How do we, and maybe there's a way that you teach it or talk about it, shift the narrative of the phones to getting back to where we're, just living life, going outside?
I talk about it. It's, I think, the same concept, but a little differently. I want you to limit low-value dopamine activities.
Like that
and
term.
replace them with high-value dopamine activities. So low value would be the phone.
Yep.
It would be pornography,
Yep.
would be gossiping, would be caffeine or nicotine or alcohol or marijuana. And just know you only have so much dopamine
To use.
and you don't want to push on your pleasure centers too intensely, too often with things that give you nothing in return.
Yeah.
And I do this with
like
my
that.
players, the athletes that I see. It's like, let's talk about what's low value and what's high value. Because too often, they go on road trips and they get bored and they're playing video games, which does nothing but steal their dopamine when they could be learning. Like, what am I going to do when I retire, right? Because so many of them, they don't think about that until a couple of years before they retire, and they've got nothing set up.
Yeah. And just by asking that question, I feel like you're almost telling them, or they're understanding like, oh yeah, he's telling me maybe I shouldn't be on my phone or be on video games 24/7.
Right.
It's crazy. They're on video games like 4 hours a day.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I remember when I
exaggeration.
first saw Justin Bieber. I'm in his docuseries Seasons. They almost killed that boy because so many concerts.
Oh,
he's working really hard until late at night, and then he'd play video games and drink or do. I mean, he's like the poor boy had no dopamine stores.
The recovery, man. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it, took a lot away from it. There's plenty more where that came from, and you can find another episode right here. Come on, you can click it right here.